My name is Maya Reyes, and I'm 32 years old now. Looking back, I never imagined that the uniform my family saw as a failure, the one my own brother called a glorified security guard costume, would one day become the very symbol of his downfall. I never thought I'd be the one to stand in a room full of our loved ones, on what was supposed to be the happiest day for our cousin, and be the instrument that dismantled my brother's entire, glittering life. It's funny how the things people underestimate about you can become your greatest strengths. They saw a blue-collar costume, they would soon learn it was a shield and a sword. Before I dive into the story of how a family wedding turned into a federal crime scene, and how I ended up arresting my own brother, I'd love it if you'd let me know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had your choices belittled by the people who were supposed to support you the most, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know we're not alone. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of people who understand that sometimes the quietest ones in the room have the most to say. To understand what happened at that wedding, you have to understand my family. We weren't a family of overt cruelty, not the kind you see in movies with screaming matches and thrown plates. Ours was a quieter, more insidious kind of poison, the kind that seeps into your bones over years of subtle dismissals and carefully curated favoritism. It revolved, as it always had, around my older brother, Julian. Julian was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting his brilliant, burning light. He was born with a charisma that could charm a snake out of its skin and an ambition that was terrifying in its intensity. He was the golden boy, the one who got straight A's without seeming to try, the one who talked his way into a prestigious internship, the one who was destined for Wall Street before he could even legally drink. Our parents, Clara and Richard, weren't just proud, they were blinded. His successes were their successes, proof that they had done everything right. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the observer. Where Julian was loud, I was reserved. Where he was charmingly manipulative, I was straightforwardly honest. These were not traits that were valued in the Reyes household. My quiet nature was seen as a lack of ambition, my honesty as a lack of social grace. The defining schism happened when I was 18. Julian was already at Wharton, his path paved with gold. The expectation was that I would follow a similar path, a good business school, a sensible corporate job, a life that would reflect well on the family name. But I didn't want that. I felt a deep, gnawing need for something more, something with structure, purpose, and a sense of duty that I found utterly lacking in the world my family worshipped. I wanted the Navy. The day I told them, you would have thought I'd announced I was joining the circus. My mother, Clara, actually wept. The military? Maya, what are you thinking? That's for other people's children. People who don't have options. My father, Richard, ever the pragmatist, was just baffled. The pay is terrible. The lifestyle is nomadic. What's the endgame here, Maya? There's no upward mobility in the way Julian has. Julian, home for a holiday, had just laughed. He leaned against the doorframe of our pristine, cream-colored kitchen, a smirk playing on his lips. So, you're going to go play G.I. Jane? What are you even going to do? Peel potatoes on a battleship. The dismissal was absolute. In their eyes, I was throwing my life away, choosing a path of hardship and obscurity when a life of comfort and prestige was right there for the taking. They didn't see honor or service. They saw a step down the social ladder. They saw a failure to launch. So I left. I went to boot camp, and the grueling discipline was a relief. For the first time, my worth wasn't measured by my social charm or my potential earning power. It was measured by my grit, my integrity, my ability to be part of a team. I chose to become a master at arms, the Navy's military police. It was a tough, demanding field, and I thrived. I loved the clarity of it. There were rules, and they applied to everyone. There was a right and a wrong, and the line between them was sharp and clear. Over the years, I did well. I made rank, earned commendations, and found a deep satisfaction in my work. But to my family, I was perpetually stuck at 18, the girl who had made the incomprehensible choice. On my rare visits home, they'd treat my career as a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. They'd ask about it in the same tone one might ask about a pottery class. So, are you still doing that? Maybe thing. This pattern of subtle, ingrained disrespect was older than my career choice, of course. It had been woven into the fabric of our childhood. I remember one Christmas when I was about 10 and Julian was 12. We'd all gotten a new, complicated board game about global strategy. It was the kind of game Julian loved, full of opportunities for alliances, betrayal, and complex maneuvering. We played for hours, and he was winning, but I was holding my own. I was watching him, as I always did. I saw him, when he thought no one was looking, slip a few extra resource cards from the bank and slide them into his pile. It was a small, deft movement. I saw it clear as day. "You cheated," I said, my voice small but firm. The table went quiet. Julian immediately scoffed. "No, I didn't. You're just a sore loser because you're about to get crushed." He was so confident, so dismissive. I looked to my parents. I saw him. He took extra cards. My mother sighed, that weary sigh she reserved for my social awkwardness. "Maya, don't be like that. It's just a game. Don't accuse your brother." My father chuckled. "He's just being clever, sweetie. You have to be aggressive to win." They didn't even consider my accusation. Julian was clever, I was a sore loser. He learned that day, or perhaps it was just reinforced, that the rules didn't really apply to him, and that I would never be believed over him. It was a lesson that would echo for decades. Another memory, sharper and more painful, came a few years later. Julian, at 16, had just gotten his driver's license and the keys to a ridiculously expensive sports car our parents had leased for him. He was reckless, drunk on his own newfound freedom. One evening, he came home late, the front fender of the car crumpled. He was frantic. He'd been racing a friend and had swiped a parked car, then driven off. He begged me not to tell our parents the truth. "Just tell them some guy cut me off and sped away. Please, Maya. They'll take the car away." I was torn. The lie felt wrong, but the panic in his eyes was real. Before I could decide, our parents came downstairs, drawn by the noise. Julian, without missing a beat, launched into a flawless performance. This guy in a pickup truck, he came out of nowhere. He sideswiped me and just kept going. I was with Maya, she saw the whole thing. He looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading but also demanding. It was a trap. My father turned to me. "Maya? Is that what happened?" I froze. The lie was on my tongue, but I couldn't say it. I just shook my head slightly, my mouth dry. I wasn't with him. The atmosphere changed instantly. Julian's panic morphed into righteous fury. "What?" "Yes, you were. Why are you lying? You're trying to get me in trouble." He was so convincing, so utterly believable in his betrayal. My parents looked from his furious face to my silent, faltering one. They chose to believe him. I was grounded for a month for lying and refusing to back up your brother. Julian got the fender repaired and a lecture on being more careful. He had learned he could not only break the rules and get away with it, but that he could use me as a shield, a scapegoat, and face no consequences. He learned that my word, my truth, meant nothing next to his. The call to come home for my cousin Isabella's wedding came on a Tuesday. I was at my desk in a sterile, windowless office at the NCIS Washington Navy Yard field office, staring at a complex flowchart on my screen that depicted a web of shell corporations and illicit money transfers. The phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Maya, darling. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The subtle dig was there, as always. As if anything I did could be truly important. "Isabella's wedding is in 3 weeks. We've already RSVP'd for you. You're coming, aren't you? It would mean so much to the family to have everyone together." Her voice was sweet, but it was laced with the familiar steel of maternal expectation. Family duty. The unspoken threat was that my absence would be another black mark against my name, more proof of my detachment. I sighed, closing my eyes. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a big case. I'm not sure I can get the leave." It was true, but it was also not the whole truth. "Oh, don't be silly," she said, her voice breezing past my objection. "It's a wedding, Maya. Family. Surely your bosses can spare you for a few days to check IDs or whatever it is you do." Julian is taking a whole week off from his very important job. If he can make time, you certainly can. The comparison was always there. Julian, the titan of finance, taking time from his world-altering work. Me, the glorified security guard, shirking family duty for a job they couldn't even be bothered to understand. I knew it was pointless to argue. Okay, Mom. I'll be there. The truth was, I had to be there. The complex web on my screen, the one that represented one of the largest insider trading schemes the SEC had seen in a decade, had a spider at its center. A spider whose name was Julian Reyes. Arriving home was like stepping into a different dimension. The quiet, orderly world of federal law enforcement dissolved, replaced by the chaotic, perfumed opulence of the Reyes household in full event planning mode. My parents' house, a sprawling colonial in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, was buzzing. Florists were arranging ridiculously large bouquets of white roses, caterers were confirming canopy selections, and my mother was directing it all with the focused intensity of a four-star general. She greeted me with a kiss on both cheeks that smelled of expensive hairspray. Maya, you're here. Your father is out on the golf course with Julian and some of his clients. You know how it is. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a moment on my simple, practical travel clothes. We're having a small family dinner tonight. Just us. Try to wear something nice, dear. I went up to my old room, which had been preserved like a museum exhibit of a girl who no longer existed. The walls were still painted a pale lavender. Teen magazines and paperback novels lined the shelves. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor. From it, I carefully removed the garment bag containing my Navy service dress blue uniform. It was my required attire for a formal event, a fact my family either didn't know or chose to ignore. To them, any uniform was a costume. To me, it was a part of my identity, a representation of a decade of my life. The irony that I would be wearing it on this particular trip was not lost on me. My career hadn't stopped at Master at Arms. My performance, my attention to detail, and my knack for seeing patterns others missed had gotten me noticed. I was recruited into the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I'd gone through the grueling training at Fleck in Georgia, emerging as a full-fledged special agent. My specialty, ironically given my family's obsession with finance, became white-collar crime. I was good at it. I understood the language of greed. I had spent my whole life observing a master of the craft. The case had landed on my desk 6 months ago, flagged by an SEC algorithm monitoring unusual trading activity surrounding a series of biotech company mergers. The trades were too perfect, too prescient. They were making someone obscene amounts of money. As we dug deeper, tracing the network of offshore accounts and shell companies, a name kept bubbling up. A rising star at a high-profile brokerage firm. Julian Reyes. My blood had run cold when I saw his name on the brief. It felt like a sick joke. My supervisor, a gruff but decent man named Agent Thompson, had called me into his office. Reyes, he'd said, sliding the file across his desk. This is your brother. It wasn't a question. You're off the case. Conflict of interest is a nightmare. But I had surprised him. With all due respect, sir, I'd said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need to stay on. I know him. I know how he thinks. I know how he operates. I can anticipate him in a way no one else can. I also knew the depth of his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable. And I knew the victims. Our investigation had revealed that one of the primary sources of his inside information was a crooked executive whose company managed retirement funds, including the thrift savings plan for countless federal employees and military members. Julian wasn't just cheating the system, he was stealing from people like me. From sailors I had served with. Thompson had studied my face for a long time. This is going to get ugly, Maya. When it comes down, it's going to be personal. I had just nodded. I know. It already is. So I stayed on, becoming the NCIS liaison to the multi-agency task force. I worked in the shadows, coordinating evidence, connecting dots. And now, the investigation was reaching its final, critical phase. The plan was to execute the arrest warrant when all the major players in the conspiracy were gathered in one place, a place they'd feel safe and untouchable. A place like a lavish family wedding. My official leave was just a cover. I was the agent on the ground, the tip of the spear. That night at dinner, the first salvo was fired. We sat around the polished mahogany dining table, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and my mother's expensive perfume. Julian was, as usual, holding court. He was tan from the golf course, his teeth blindingly white against his skin, his bespoke shirt perfectly fitted. He was talking about a recent deal, dropping names and figures that made my father beam with vicarious pride. He finally turned his attention to me, a lazy, condescending smile on his face. He'd noticed my uniform hanging in its garment bag on the back of my door when he'd gone upstairs. "So, Maya," he began, leaning back in his chair and swirling his wine. "Got your little costume all pressed and ready for the big day? You going to be directing traffic in the parking lot?" My father chuckled weakly. "Julian, be nice." My mother just smiled, a silent endorsement of her son's wit. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, but years of training had taught me to control my tells. I kept my expression neutral. "It's the required uniform for formal events, Julian." Right. "Formalities," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just funny. Here I am, moving hundreds of millions of dollars around, shaping market trends, and my little sister is playing dress-up as a security guard. Tell me, what do you actually do all day? Write parking tickets on the pier? Check IDs at the gate to make sure no one's smuggling contraband cokes onto the base." The words were designed to sting, to minimize me, to reinforce the family narrative. He was the master of the universe. I was a glorified hall monitor. I took a slow sip of water, meeting his gaze. "Something like that," I said, my voice even. My non-answer only fueled his arrogance. He saw it as proof that my job was too insignificant to even describe. "You know," he said, leaning forward conspiratorially, his voice dropping, but still loud enough for our parents to hear. "I could probably get you a real job. Seriously. My firm is always looking for people. We need good security in the building. I'm not kidding, the pay is probably double what the government gives you for saluting flags." He winked, then took a large gulp of his wine, pleased with himself. A real job. A security guard in his building. The insult was so profound, so perfectly aligned with their view of me, that I almost had to admire its precision. My mother patted my hand. "He's just teasing, dear. He means well. He worries about you." The gaslighting was breathtaking. In their world, his cruelty was concern, his arrogance was success, and my service was a folly. I felt a cold knot of resolve tighten in my stomach. The girl who used to flush with shame and anger was gone. In her place was Special Agent Reyes, gathering intelligence. And the subject was confirming every aspect of his psychological profile. The day before the wedding was a flood of extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in years descended on the house, filling it with loud chatter and the smell of various colognes. The condescension became a chorus. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, cornered me by the cheese platter. "Maya, it's so brave what you do," she said, her head tilted with pity. "But isn't it terribly dangerous? All those rough types. You're such a pretty girl. You should be settling down, not carrying a gun." My Uncle Mark clapped me on the shoulder with a little too much force. "Heard you're in the Navy. I did a 2-year stint back in the day. Hated it. Couldn't wait to get out and make some real money. But hey, good for you for sticking with it." They spoke of my life as if it were a temporary condition, a phase I would surely outgrow. They couldn't conceive of it as a choice, a career, a source of pride. My father pulled me aside at one point, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Are you happy, Maya?" he asked, his voice low. "Truly? It's just this life. It seems so hard. Julian is doing so well. He's set for life. I just worry that you're not, thinking about your future." He was trying to be kind, I knew, but every word was a paper cut. His definition of a happy future was so narrow, so completely defined by the financial yardstick Julian had set, that my life was simply incomprehensible to him. There was no room in his worldview for a daughter who found value in duty instead of dollars. Later that evening, seeking a moment of peace, I found my cousin Isabella, the bride-to-be, sitting alone on the back patio. She looked stressed, her face pale beneath her tan. She was one of the few relatives I actually liked. She was kind and down-to-earth, a wildflower in a garden of carefully cultivated orchids. "Hey," I said softly, sitting next to her. "Bridal jitters?" She forced a smile. "Something like that." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Can I tell you something? And you have to promise not to tell anyone, especially not your mom or Julian." I nodded. "Of course." She took a deep breath. "It's money. We're kind of in trouble. My fiancé, Kevin, he invested a big chunk of our savings, the money we had for the down payment on a house, into this can't-miss stock tip." My internal alarm started blaring. "A stock tip?" "Yeah," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He got it from Julian." My blood turned to ice. "From Julian?" "Kevin looks up to him so much," she explained, wringing her hands. "Julian was at some party, and he told Kevin that he had this inside track on a small pharmaceutical company that was about to be bought out. He said it was a sure thing, guaranteed to triple in value. So Kevin went all in." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "We lost almost all of it, Maya. The stock tanked last week. The merger fell through. Julian said it was just bad luck, a risk of the market, but it was everything we had. Now we have to pay for this wedding, and we're starting our marriage in a huge hole." I felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just abstract white-collar crime anymore. This was my cousin. This was her future. Julian hadn't just given a bad tip. I knew from the investigation that this was one of his signature moves in the scheme, the pump and dump. He'd get inside information that a deal was going to fail, then he'd convince gullible, hero-worshipping people like Kevin to buy the stock, driving the price up artificially. Then he and his co-conspirators would short the stock, betting on its failure, and make a fortune when it inevitably collapsed. He wasn't just arrogant. He was a predator. He was feeding on the people in his own circle, people who trusted him. He was ruining lives for profit and then shrugging it off as bad luck. I put my arm around Isabella. "I'm so sorry, Izzy. That's awful." But inside, any lingering shred of familial sentiment, any flicker of doubt about what I had to do, was extinguished. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my target. And he had just given me the most personal motivation I could possibly imagine. I looked out at the perfectly manicured lawn, at the string lights twinkling in the trees, a beautiful facade for the ugliness festering within. The mission was no longer just professional. It was now a matter of justice for my own family. The morning of the wedding was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Hairstylists and makeup artists swarmed the upstairs rooms. The scent of coffee, hairspray, and anxiety hung heavy in the air. My mother, in a silk robe, was a whirlwind of activity, fussing over Isabella's veil, then rushing to make sure Julian's cufflinks were just right. She swept past me as I stood in my room, already dressed in my pristine dress blues. She paused, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan. "Oh, Maya, that uniform. It's very stark, isn't it? Are you absolutely sure you don't have a nice dress you could have worn instead?" "This is the uniform, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "It's what's appropriate." She just sighed and patted my cheek. "Well, if you must. Just try to stand near the back, dear. We don't want to confuse the photographers." She bustled away, leaving me in her wake. Don't confuse the photographers. It was another small cut, another reminder that I didn't fit, that I was an anomaly to be managed, an inconvenient truth in their perfectly curated world. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The dark blue wool, the sharp creases, the rows of ribbons on my chest, each one representing a tour, a commendation, a piece of my life they had never bothered to ask about. To them, it was a costume. To me, it was my armor. And today, I knew I would need it. The ceremony was held in a picturesque old stone church. The air was filled with the scent of lilies and old wood. I sat in a pew near the back, just as my mother had suggested, an island of dark blue in a sea of pastels and charcoal gray. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the altar. I watched Julian, the best man, standing beside Kevin. He looked impeccable in his tailored tuxedo, a confident, charming smile fixed on his face. He was the picture of success, of brotherly support. The hypocrisy was nauseating. He had financially crippled the very man he was now standing beside, smiling and preparing to offer a toast. During a quiet moment in the vows, my phone vibrated silently in the small purse I carried. I glanced down. It was a text from my NCIS partner, Dave, all teams in position. Awaiting your signal. Go is on receipt of warrant. ETA on signature is 1600, 4 o'clock. Right in the middle of the reception. The tension in my chest tightened into a cold, hard knot. The world seemed to split in two. There was the warm, sacred space of the church, the hopeful faces of Isabella and Kevin, the organ music swelling. And then there was my world, the cold, clinical reality of tactical teams, federal warrants, and the impending demolition of a man's life. I had to hold both realities in my head at once, maintaining a placid, smiling facade for the family, while inside, the clock was ticking down to 0 hour. The reception was at a lavish country club, a sprawling building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a golf course that glowed emerald green in the late afternoon sun. Champagne flowed, a string quartet played softly, and hundreds of guests mingled, their laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged ballroom. Julian was in his element, the center of attention at the head table, accepting congratulations and compliments as if he were the groom. He was magnetic, charming everyone he spoke to. I watched him from across the room, a predator in his natural habitat. He was untouchable, wrapped in a cocoon of wealth and privilege. But I knew the walls of that cocoon were about to be torn away. At 3:58 p.m., my phone vibrated again. A new text from Dave, warrant signed. We are green. Your call, Agent Reyes, my call. The power to initiate the end was now, literally, in the palm of my hand. I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. The years of being underestimated, of being the quiet one in the background, had given me a unique advantage. No one was watching me. No one saw me as a threat. I was just Maya, the awkward sister in the strange outfit. As if on cue, Julian, flushed with champagne and adulation, made his way over to me. He was with a group of his friends, other young men in expensive suits with the same predatory gleam in their eyes. He slung an arm around my shoulders, his breath hot with alcohol. And here she is, he announced to his friends, his voice booming. My little sister, Petty Officer Reyes. Keeping us all safe from, I don't know, improperly parked aircraft carriers. His friends laughed, a chorus of sycophantic snickers. The humiliation was public now, a performance for his audience. Seriously, sis, he said, leaning in close, his voice a mock whisper that carried across the nearby tables. This whole military thing is a cute hobby, but it's time to grow up. When are you going to get a real job? I meant what I said. I can get you a gig. Head of security for my building. The pay's great. You'd get to wear a cool little uniform and everything. He winked at his friends. Maybe even carry a real gun, not just a prop. That was it. That was the final, perfect encapsulation of his entire worldview. His final dismissal. My entire career, my service, my identity, all of it reduced to a cute hobby. My uniform, a symbol of honor and commitment to millions, was just a cool little costume in his eyes. He saw my life's work as a stepping stone to being a security guard for him. The ultimate irony was that in his world, he couldn't even fathom that I was the one with the real power. I looked at his smug, handsome face, the face our family had worshipped for 3 decades. And I knew it was time. I gave him a small, thin smile. You know what, Julian? Maybe you're right. His face broke into a triumphant grin. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd finally broken me. That's my girl, he said, clapping me on the shoulder again. We'll talk Monday. I excused myself, my heart pounding a steady, controlled rhythm. I walked through a set of French doors out onto a stone terrace overlooking the gardens. The air was cool. I took a deep breath, pulling my phone from my purse. I found Dave's number and hit call. He answered on the first ring. Reyes. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly level. Dave, I said, looking back through the glass at the glittering party, at my brother laughing with his friends. The package is ready for delivery. You are a go. I hung up the phone, slipped it back into my purse, and walked back inside. I found a position near the main entrance, partially concealed by a large floral arrangement, and I waited. The band started playing a loud, upbeat song. The takedown would be swift. It would be quiet. And it would be absolute. The moment it began was almost surgical in its precision. The vibrant dance music didn't just stop. It was cut, sliced clean in the middle of a note, plunging the ballroom into a shocking, unnatural silence. The laughter died in people's throats. Every head turned towards the grand double doors at the entrance. They swung open, not with a crash, but with a silent, coordinated push from both sides. Through them filed a dozen men and women. They weren't wedding guests. They were dressed in dark, functional suits and tactical vests, the bold yellow and white letters on their backs spelling out their purpose: FBI, SEC, and CIS. They moved with an unnerving, fluid efficiency, fanning out along the perimeter of the room, securing the exits, their faces impassive, their eyes scanning the crowd. The festive atmosphere of the multi-million-dollar wedding reception evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, prickling dread. The air became thick with confusion and fear. Guests froze with champagne flutes halfway to their lips, their smiles dissolving into masks of bewilderment. The lead agent, a tall, gray-haired man I knew as Special Agent in Charge Harris from the FBI, stepped forward into the center of the now-empty dance floor. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who held all the cards. He held up a document. "My apologies for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but amplified by the cavernous silence of the room. He didn't need to shout. Every person was hanging on his every word. "I have a federal warrant." He scanned the head table, his eyes landing on my brother. "Julian Reyes?" Julian, his face a cocktail of outrage and confusion, pushed his chair back and stood up. He smoothed his tuxedo jacket, a pathetic attempt to regain control. "What the hell is this? Who are you? You are ruining my cousin's wedding. This is private property." He was trying to use the same entitled bluster that had worked for him his entire life, but it was like throwing pebbles against a fortress wall. Harris didn't even flinch. He let Julian finish his tirade before he spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "Julian Reyes, you are the primary subject of a federal investigation." He began to read from the warrant, his voice a dispassionate monotone that listed off the charges, each one a hammer blow to the foundation of my family's pride. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, insider trading, money laundering. With each charge, a visible tremor went through the room. I could see my mother, Clara, rise from her chair, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. "This is a mistake," she cried out, her voice shrill. "A ridiculous mistake. My son is one of the most respected brokers on the street. This is harassment." My father, Richard, just stood there, his face ashen, his hand gripping the back of his chair as if to hold himself up. He looked utterly broken, the edifice of his son's success crumbling into dust before his eyes. Julian was stammering now, his arrogance finally cracking. "This is insane. My lawyers, you have no idea who I am." Agent Harris looked up from the warrant, his gaze cold. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of the moment settle on everyone. Then he looked past Julian, his eyes finding me where I stood by the entrance. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. "The lead case agent will handle the arrest personally." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. "Lead case agent? Who?" And then I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement. I moved from the shadows into the light. The room was so quiet I could hear the soft swish of my uniform trousers as I walked across the marble floor. Every single eye in that ballroom swung to me. My family, my aunts and uncles, Julian's smirking friends, the bride and groom. Their faces were a gallery of stunned, uncomprehending shock. Julian turned, and his eyes locked with mine. For a moment, he just stared, his brain unable to process the image. The sister he had just mocked, the security guard, was now walking toward him with the authority of the United States government. The cogs turned, and confusion gave way to a dawning, sickening horror. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Maya, what are you doing? Tell them. Tell them this is all some stupid prank. I stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the beads of sweat on his forehead. I looked into the eyes of the boy who had cheated at board games, the teenager who had lied about a car crash, the man who had stolen my cousin's future. All the years of being dismissed, of being invisible, of being the family disappointment, coalesced into this one, crystal-clear moment. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of his little sister. It was the calm, formal, and unwavering voice of a federal agent. Julian Reyes, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument or appeal. I am Special Agent Maya Reyes of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I saw the last bit of color drain from his face as the title registered. It is my duty to inform you that you are under arrest for violations of the United States Code. I reached for the handcuffs on my belt. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I continued reciting the Miranda rights, my voice steady, my hands efficient as I secured his wrists behind his back. The clicks of the handcuffs locking into place were like gunshots in the dead silent room. My uniform was no longer a costume. My job was no longer a joke. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his life, my glorified security guard costume represented the one thing his money could not buy and his charm could not defeat: consequence. The aftermath was a blur of controlled, professional action superimposed on a scene of total emotional chaos. As two FBI agents began to escort Julian away, he twisted his head, his eyes, now wild with panic and hatred, fixed on me. Maya, you snake. How could you? I'm your brother. His voice was a raw, desperate scream. It was then that my mother, Clara, finally broke her frozen tableau. She lunged towards me, her face contorted with a fury I had never seen before. You did this, she shrieked, her voice cracking with grief and rage. How could you do this to him? To your own brother. To this family. You've destroyed us. Agent Harris stepped between us, a solid, immovable presence. Ma'am, I need you to step back. My father simply collapsed into his chair, looking 100 years old, his face buried in his hands. The beautiful wedding, the culmination of all their social aspirations, had become a crime scene. Guests were whispering frantically, their phones held up, capturing every mortifying second for posterity. The Reyes family's humiliation was now going viral. I didn't engage with my mother. I couldn't. The daughter in me was gone, walled off behind a barricade of professional duty. I turned to Agent Harris, my voice clipped. The primary target is in custody. The scene is secure. I was all business, all agent. But then my eyes found Isabella. She was standing beside her new husband, her beautiful white dress a stark contrast to the ugliness of the moment, silent tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Her dream day shattered. A sharp pang of guilt, the only personal emotion I allowed myself to feel, pierced through my professional armor. I walked over to her, past the gawking guests and my mother's hateful glare. Izzy, I said softly. I am so sorry. I swear to you, there was no other way to do this. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable, and nodded numbly. The apology felt hollow, but it was the only one I could give. I didn't ride in the same vehicle as Julian. I left him to the FBI agents and got into the back of a black government sedan with Agent Harris. As the car pulled away from the country club, leaving the flashing lights and the ruined party behind, the immense weight of what I had just done began to settle on me. The adrenaline that had kept me sharp and focused for hours began to ebb away, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the city lights blurring past the window. You did good back there, Reyes, Harris finally said, his voice quiet but firm. He wasn't a man given to easy praise. That was one of the coldest, most difficult things I've ever had to witness an agent do. It took a hell of a lot of guts. I just nodded, unable to summon the energy to speak. I stared out at the dark city. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, Julian's arrogant smirk, the condescending laughter of his friends, the click of the handcuffs, the utter devastation on my parents' faces. I didn't feel the triumphant joy of revenge. There was no elation. What I felt was a grim, quiet satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that comes from a difficult job done right. The kind of peace that comes from seeing justice served, no matter how high the personal cost. The validation I had craved for so long from my family, the approval I had desperately wanted as a younger woman, now felt like a foreign concept. It meant nothing. The validation I felt now came from a different place entirely. It came from upholding my oath. As I thought about the evidence we had, the years of meticulous work it took to build the case, and the faces of the victims I'd seen in the files, military retirees, young families like Isabella and Kevin, people whose trust had been violated and whose futures had been stolen, my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. I had made the right choice. It was the only choice. The weeks and months that followed were a long, slow grind. The case against Julian and his co-conspirators was even more massive than we had initially thought. The press dubbed it one of the most audacious insider trading rings in a generation. Julian, stripped of his charm and expensive suits, was just another defendant in an orange jumpsuit, his arrogance replaced by a sullen, simmering rage. My family, as my mother had predicted, was destroyed. But not by me. It was destroyed by the lie they had worshipped. It was destroyed by the greed they had mistaken for ambition. My mother refused to speak to me. The only communication I received from her were a series of venomous, rambling text messages, accusing me of jealousy, of betrayal, of being a monster. After the third one, I blocked her number. It hurt, a deep, primal hurt, but it was also a necessary amputation. My father tried a different tactic. He called me a few times, his voice weak and pleading. Maya, can't you talk to them? Tell them he made a mistake? He's your brother. There has to be another way. He couldn't grasp the reality of the situation. He was still looking for an angle, a loophole, a way to make it all go away. He couldn't accept that the rules, for once, were applying to Julian. In one of our last conversations, he'd said, his voice cracking, "Your mother says you were always jealous of his success." I finally found my voice then, a voice cold and sharp with years of repressed truth. His success? I asked. Was it his success when he stole from his own cousin Dad? Was it his success when he gambled with the retirement funds of soldiers? That wasn't success. That was a crime. And you were all so blinded by the money you couldn't see it. He had no answer. After that, I stopped taking his calls too. The schism was complete. I had drawn a boundary. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. My survival depended on it. In the void left by my biological family, a new one took root. My chosen family. My team at NCIS became my anchor. They were people who understood. They saw my actions not as a betrayal, but as the ultimate act of integrity. With them, I didn't have to explain myself. My worth wasn't questioned. My uniform wasn't a costume, it was a credential they respected. My partner, Dave, and his wife started having me over for Sunday dinners, their noisy, chaotic home a balm for my soul. And then, a few months after the arrest, I got a call from Isabella. I was expecting anger, or at least resentment. Her wedding day was a memory of trauma and humiliation. But her voice was kind. "Can we get coffee?" she asked. We met at a small cafe far from our old neighborhood. She looked different, less stressed, more centered. "I wanted to thank you," she said, stirring her latte. I was stunned. "Thank me? Izzy, I ruined your wedding." She shook her head, a small, sad smile on her face. "You didn't ruin it. Julian did. Long before you ever showed up. You just turned on the lights so everyone else could see the monster that was already there. Kevin and I, we're in therapy. We're working through it. But we're honest with each other. The secrets are gone. And you know what? A few weeks ago, we got a check in the mail. From the victim restitution fund the court set up. It was a lot of our money back." She looked at me, her eyes clear. "You did that. You did what was right, even when it was the hardest thing in the world. You're the only one in that family who had any real strength, Maya." Her words were a gift. It was a piece of my family, a piece of my past, reaching out not with blame, but with understanding. It was a bridge back, not to the toxic hole, but to the parts that were worth saving. My self-worth, which for so long had been a fragile thing dependent on the whims of my parents' approval, was finally solidifying. It was being forged in the fire of difficult choices and tempered by the respect of good people. Years have passed now. Julian is serving a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The family fortune, built so heavily on his illicit earnings, is gone. My parents sold the big house. I hear they live a much quieter life now. We don't speak. I am a senior special agent now, leading my own team. I'm respected, I'm good at my job, and I am, for the first time in my life, profoundly at peace. Sometimes I think about that final, sneering insult from my brother at the wedding reception. His offer of a job as a security guard in his building. The irony is he was right in a way. I am a security guard. But I don't guard buildings. I guard the integrity of the financial systems he tried to plunder. I guard the rule of law he believed he was above. I guard the savings and futures of countless people, people like my cousin, people like the soldiers I once served alongside. My uniform isn't a costume, it's a commitment. And as it turns out, that commitment, that sense of duty, was worth more than all the money in his world. In the end, I learned that your value isn't something that can be granted to you or taken away by others. It isn't measured in dollars or job titles or the approval of your family. True value is something you build within yourself, choice by difficult choice, day by disciplined day. It's about knowing what you stand for and having the courage to uphold it, especially when it's hard. So I have to ask you all, what do you think? Was I right to arrest my own brother, or should family loyalty have come first? I'm genuinely curious to read your perspectives in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more stories about finding your strength. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need a reminder that being underestimated can be the greatest superpower of all. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my story. I wish you all strength on your own journeys.